This morning, we are continuing our series based on Bishop Michael Curry's book, Love is the Way, Holding On to Hope in Troubling Times. Lynne and I will be discussing a chapter with my favorite title, What Dolly Parton and Desmond Tutu Have in Common. The question Curry asks is this: can love really change the world? How many of you would say yes? Show of hands. How many say no? Ooh, that's good. I like that. For those of you on Zoom, everybody said yes that were here in the sanctuary this morning. Curry sets out to show us how.
This is from Dolly Parton's book, Dream More. Since my early childhood, I've felt like my dreams were the foundation of my drive to accomplish all things I love. It was a dream that made me feel dressed up when I just had old hand-me-down, ragged clothes. Dreams took me from a shack at the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains to Nashville, and then to Hollywood.
Desmond Tutu once said, "I believe that one day South Africa will be free. All of her children, black, brown, and colored, all of her children will be free. I believe this not because I can see it, but because I believe that God has a dream for South Africa. And this is the God who raised Jesus from the dead. I believe that God has a dream for South Africa because nothing can stop God." What do these two have in common? They are both dreamers. These are two kinds of dreams. Dolly's was personal. Tutu's was a dream for his country, for his people.
Dolly dreamed of an alternative reality for herself. When it became her reality, she dedicated herself to fighting illiteracy and helping children learn to read and love books to help them to dream of a better life. She recently put $1 million into vaccine research and rewrote the lyrics of Jolene to encourage people to get vaccinated. She sang it as she herself was filmed being vaccinated. A personal dream became a dream for the wider country.
We asked ourselves, who are some of the dreamers today?
The athletes in Toyota. No. Yeah.
Toyota? Huh?
Yeah, well, so. In Japan, how's that? There are 11,090 athletes are competing. 339 medals will be handed out. Simone Biles, whose dream came crashing down, managed to get on the balance beam one last time after she had disappointed herself and her fans because her body and her mind were not in sync. She was finally comfortable going on the balance beam, and she won a bronze medal. When interviewed last Monday, when I was watching track and field, men's track and field, the young man that was being interviewed, his name was Kai Benjamin. I had never heard his name before, but that was it, Kai, K-A-I. He was very upset as he's being interviewed, and you could see he was wiping his face because he had tears. And in the middle of this interview, he stopped and he looked up at the monitor where his family was being shown, and he says, "I'm sorry, Mom." He came in second and won silver. His mom had dreams of gold, and that is why he did that.
Most of their lives, Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson have been dreaming of flying into space, and it finally happened last month. I guess you have to be a billionaire to make these kinds of dreams come true. 7,600 wealthy people from 159 countries registered to participate in a bidding war to join Bezos on his flight. They also were dreamers. I have to give him credit for inviting Wally Funk to come along. She was an 82-year-old aviation pioneer who had trained to be an astronaut and never got to fly. Bezos made her dream come true. I call space travel the ultra-wealthy's new playground. They're getting a lot of pushback for how they're spending their billions when so many people here on Earth are suffering. Are they dreaming God's dream? Aside from the ones that we have in our sleep, most dreams don't happen overnight. They take time, perseverance, hard work, setbacks, and even sacrifice. Curry begins this chapter remembering his grandma, telling him stories she had heard about Jubilee Day, when the slaves were freed. They said it was like a dream. Curry says it was a moment when the impossible became possible. The divine promise was made flesh, free at last. We thought back about the many times in this country when dreams did become a reality.
When women got the vote.
When they changed our lives,
Sorry.
I had to swallow. When they changed our lives and sometimes the course of history.
When women got the vote.
When Social Security and Medicare changed the lives of our seniors.
When the Civil Rights Act was passed.
When gays and lesbians finally were allowed to marry.
When Obamacare passed and millions of Americans got health care finally.
When Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon. You can think, I'm sure, of many others. We talked about hope last week. The language of dream is the language of hope. It's the language of reality being changed by a new possibility. Curry calls dreams love's visions, the boundless faith that the world can be remade to look more like God's dream, what God hoped for his creation. We sang about God's dream this morning. So we need to ask ourselves, are our dreams in sync with God's?
Curry says, time and time again in history, the positive, miraculous, even crazy energy of dreamers has saved us. In the insane times, it's sanity that kills us, the sanity of complicity of the present nightmare. The only people who have ever changed the world or anything for the good have been those who have dared to dream of an alternative reality, another possibility that the one that confronts us day by day. We've been living in a nightmare, a pandemic, the effects of global warming, gun violence, conspiracy theories. Who is complicit in the present nightmare?
Those who have refused to get vaccinated and those who believe the pandemic isn't real. Those who deny global warming and continue to contribute to it. A relative of mine, who will remain nameless, but deliberately puts his empty beer cans in the trash instead of the recycling bin that sits right next to it. Those who stock up on guns, afraid the government is going to take them away. Those joining Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and other violent extremist groups. Those who spread conspiracy theories all over the internet. The list, it just goes on and on. As we said last week, Curry brings his message back home to each one of us personally. When making decisions, he asked, is this just about me? Or is it about we? Does the decision serve only my unenlightened self-interest? Or does it somehow serve the greater good? What are you dreaming about, dreaming for? Who is it serving?
Most people dream about things for themselves or their families. My dream has been for my family to be happy and healthy, and so far, most of them have been. How many are actually dreaming for others? Protesters, Black Lives Matter, food banks, and the list goes on and on.
Langston Hughes writes in his 1951 poem Harlem, "What happens to a dream deferred? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode?" Curry says the year 1968 felt like midnight in America. It was a year America exploded. Vietnam was raging. Many of us, especially younger people facing the draft, were dreaming of peace, of an end to the war. But those dreams kept being deferred. I marched in peaceful candlelight vigils and protests, while others invaded our peaceful Iowa College town and broke down windows, looted, and set fire to buildings. I can remember sitting with other drama students circling around all night one of our theaters, protecting it because others were trying to burn these buildings down. As our faculty came around with hot chocolate to keep us warm throughout the night. It's in such times that we ask ourselves, can love really change the world?
Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream, and he was gunned down for it on April 4th, 1968. He embodied what Maya Angelou called the hopes and dreams of a slave. His were the hopes of a nation struggling and yet yearning to live its highest and noblest ideals of freedom, equality, and dignity for all. Curry calls MLK a prophet of love. What happens to a dream deferred? After the deaths of Martin Luther King Jr., both Kennedys and other civil rights leaders, Curry says that it was as if hope was cursed to die on the altar of reality. Our country exploded. Riots in the streets, cities burned. In the dark of midnight, many lost sight of love's vision. Dashed hope is the experience of a nightmare in daylight.
We experienced one here in LA after the Rodney King verdict. I was living in Northridge at the time, glued to the TV. They were telling us not to leave the house. Parts of the city had exploded when dreams were crushed.
January 6th, our Capitol exploded because of the dashed hopes and dreams of a president and his followers who attacked the Capitol. I was shocked when I turned on the TV, saw American citizens carrying ball bats and poles and even crutches to the windows and doors and people. They were thinking they were going to get in to stop the count of electoral votes, to declare Biden president. These are times when people in our country lost hope.
What role does one's faith play in such times? Curry says that faith is trusting God, or just holding on to God when your heart is breaking, when it's hard to see, when you don't understand, and even when you're mad at God. I remember calling Ann Cohen from Iowa years ago when my mother became paralyzed and almost died. I told her I was so mad at God. She said that was okay. God could take it. Later, I came to understand that God didn't let bad things happen to good people. So my anger had been misdirected. But my faith kept me praying and trusting that God was with us all through that difficult time, and we all grew and learned from it.
I was never mad at God. Somehow that didn't even play into it. Of course, I was upset when my son had a fatal accident and my husband had a heart attack, both of them fatal. I wasn't mad at God. I think my faith kept me sane. I'm not sure. Of course, I was upset about it, but God never came into it, except that I think God sent most of my son's friends to the hospital to see him in ICU, and the hospital had never let more than 2 people at a time in ICU to see a person. And it just seemed as though it was the right thing to do, and I think God had a play in it.
Curry asks, how can faith or trust in God transform us from anger and despair to moving forward with a deeper commitment? We saw this happening after the assassination of Martin Luther King. Curry says, with time, people's anger turned to acceptance in the form of radical trust in God that translated into a deeper commitment to the work for which King gave his life. They dared to dream that the struggle would continue, and it did, and it does, even to this day.
The people who march for Black Lives Matter have a dream. The people who are trying to get rid of our voting rights, which is not going to happen, voting rights is a right for every American citizen. And gun control, which I just heard there was a shooting in Northridge, which is pretty close to me. And then there are people who are operating food banks for the many people who lost jobs and can't afford to buy much food for their families. Dreams of a new world will not be realized without struggle, opposition, and difficulty. That's the nature of the beast. We see this with families of children murdered in Newtown, and the teens in Florida, and the family of George Floyd. They continue to work for justice. Oh, and Breonna Taylor also. They are working for justice to turn a tragedy into hope. To be a person of faith, one must refuse to accept and acquiesce to the way things often are. It's to pray and work for the way things could be. God is dependent on us to do God's work here on earth.
As Christians, if we are to move the world closer to God's dream, we must live out the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Paul told us how in Romans chapter 12 that Sean read so beautifully for us this morning. Let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good, rejoice in hope, persevere in prayer, bless those who persecute you. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Never avenge yourselves. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
How do we change a negative to a positive? Change starts with a positive vision. Dreamers understand that we need to change the world with love, not hate. Curry was asked whether love was an effective tool to change this world we're living in today. Can it work? He believes yes, without reservation. When faced with a world filled with selfishness, indifference, fear, and even hatred, what does it get us? Mass shootings, the murder of innocents, brutal dictatorships, the suppression of ethnic and religious minorities, the mistreatment of refugees, the rise of racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Asian, anti-trans, nationalistic nativism, too many words here, and xenophobia. Fear begins to rule our lives. People are hurting and hating others because they're different. We have wars and rumors of wars. We have an earth that has been exploited to a crisis point. It's mass insanity. If the world is built on love, it starts to look like the sane one.
John Lewis, in his book, Across the Bridge, wrote of the civil rights movement, "Roots of love nurtured by a river of faith are a sure protection against many dangers, even the power of military might." And I saw this not as an idealist who speaks in poetry and platitudes, but as a realist who has faced an army of weapons drawn against me with love as my only defense. Love builds, hate destroys. Curry calls a commitment to live love's way an act of faith. I was reminded of Pope Francis' trip to Iraq this past year, preaching love and unity as a way to change that country. People asked, why is he going now? They were worried about his safety. They didn't need to worry. He was carrying a message of love, and the crowds came out to hear it.
Gregory Boyle's work with gang members, both male and female, in South Central LA are good examples of this love. Getting them off the streets, giving them a place to go and congregate and grow, teaching them about business and making things such as salsa, which they did have in certain supermarkets in our area. I used to buy the salsa at Ralph's, but I haven't found it there for a long time. So I don't know what's happened to that part of the business. Maybe it's Ralph's, I don't know.
Jesus instructed us in his Sermon on the Mount, love those who, love those who curse you. It was a call for nonviolence. He was offering a how-to guide on changing a negative situation into a positive one. For love to survive when dreams are deferred, Curry says, it must be practiced day in and day out. King called it cosmic companionship. When it's dark on earth, God is the one who whispers, "Let me tell you about this dream." So I invite you now to stand once more and sing the chorus of Dream God's Dream. The words will be put on the screen. Hope, there we go. Okay. Curry ends the chapter with this dream. Imagine, if you will, the impact of each and every person on this planet taking the time to define and to live out loving principles. In fact, imagine 50% of everybody doing this and being successful even half the time. Politics, business and commerce, religious life, and community would be transformed. May it be so. Amen.